Come back to the next video. In today's video I will show you how to create an Android plugin to do GraphQL mutation and queries for the Godot game engine. Now if you don't know GraphQL, think of it as like similar to REST APIs but just better. Now I'm not a GraphQL expert, but from what I have understood is that the advantage of GraphQL is what you request is what you get. You don't overfetch or underfetch data in GraphQL. So that's the whole mostly the advantage of GraphQL. And also you have one single endpoint for all your queries and mutation. So queries are basically REST, like just how we do get API in REST. You can consider queries something similar to that. And for mutations are something like post, put, delete, everything is mutation. And you also have one URL, like one base URL. You don't have to have different URLs for different API endpoints because queries and mutation run only on one URL. So I have already created Node.js backend for this. I already have a video on my channel. If you are curious, you can watch that as well. But firstly I will show you. So this is the query which we will be using inside our Android plugin, and it returns a list of user. Also, if you want to add a user, you can run this mutation, and here I can add any name. So here I have one. I'll add something like John, and if I try to run it, here you can see again it I messed up the output for this add mutation a little. At least I think I should have just written that particular user, but here I'm just returning all the users. But now if I go, but I think that's fine. But now if I go to that this query of getting all the users, and if I run my first query again, here you can see this thing was added. Now I will show you my Godot output as well. So here I have my Godot app running on real Android device, and if I click on get user, I'm just displaying all the users inside this label. I'm not sure if this is visible to you, but here you can see that Shane and John was added. Like this John I think is getting cut off, but I think that's fine. Next I will add one user by clicking on this add user button. Now I have just hard coded that user, like the username is Murli. So I've just hard coded it, but I think that's fine. Like I wanted to keep this tutorial simple, but you can add a text field as well, and inside that text field whatever the user types, then you can add it over inside the button click. Okay, so I'll just go to my Android output. I'll click on add user. Okay, so the user has been added. Now if I try to do get, because once I do the mutation, I am not really sending the output from the Godot side to the native from the native Android side to the Godot side, but for get user I am sending it. So if I try to do get user again, here you can see that Murli was added as well. Sorry about the small font, I hope you guys can see it, but anyways it works. So I'll show you how to do GraphQL stuff via an Android plugin. So firstly you will have to create an Android project using Android Studio. It can be an empty views project or a Jetpack Compose project. Once you create the project, you will have to create a library as well. So just right click on your project, new module, select Android library. You can name it as my library, I guess. Name it whatever you feel like. Change the package name to whatever you feel like, and click on finish. I have already created it, so won't create it again. So once you have this my library, you will have to go to build.gradle.kts of your library. Next you will have to add this Godot dependency. Now at the time of this recording I'm using Godot 4.2.1. if you are using some higher version, make sure you use that version over here. You can also find this version on Maven Central. Once you do that, you have to add this Apollo Kotlin. So Apollo Kotlin is basically like it helps us to do GraphQL calls from native Android side. So that's what this is. So add this over here as well. Next you will see sync now, something button like this over here. Just click on sync now. As soon as you click on sync now, you will get an error saying that no schema GraphQL found. So to resolve that error, what you will have to do is just open your terminal and then run this command, this entire command. Okay, I'll just comment this out. So just copy this command and run it over here inside your Android project, and this should be the URL of your backend. So my URL is localhost:4000/GraphQL, and this is where you want the GraphQL files to be saved. So here you can see it is my folder of my library. So my library /src main GraphQL /schemas.graphql. If you are doing this for the first time, I request you to keep the folder name same, otherwise you might face a lot of issue. Of course this should be different depending on what you named your plugin, but I think this entire thing can be same. Okay, once that is done, you can click on sync. Now it will download all the dependencies for you. Once that is done, you can go to the project drop down over here. First you will also make sure you install the GraphQL plugin. So go to Android Studio, go to settings, then go to plugins, and you can download this GraphQL plugin. Go from marketplace. Now the only reason we are installing that GraphQL plugin because it provides proper IntelliSense. If you don't want IntelliSense or code completion, you can ignore that plugin as well. So once you go to your project drop down and go to src of your library, go to main, go to GraphQL, and you should see this file called schemas.graphql. so that file is automatically generated once you run that particular command which I shown you, this command. Okay, next you have to create two files, one for add user mutation and one for get user query get user query. So I have created these two files and I have literally copy pasted it from my node backend as well, only this name has been changed. Okay, so here you can see I have used it as get users. Again, do remember this name because this will help us for code completion part. Okay, so get users, and for add users I have kept it as add users, and it takes an add user input. Okay, once you add these two files, another important step is you will have to click this hammer button or build button. So it will what it does is that Apollo Kotlin library checks your GraphQL files, and depending on that it does some kind of a code generation. So whenever you want to use this mutation and query, it automatically gives you proper code completion. Once that is done, go to your Android drop down again. So first we will create so I have created a data class. So typically if you look, my queries and mutation mostly give me id and name. Okay, so I have created this id and name. So this is kind of like a Pojo class if you are coming from Java background. Okay, so this is data class in Kotlin. This will help us to map the GraphQL output to our simple user output. Then I have created this class called user mapper. So here if you remember, our file name this query name was get users. So here it should be get users query dot user. So this would be proper IntelliSense. You can't write whatever comes to your mind. This name of two simple user query can be anything. Okay, so here actually I'm mapping the GraphQL get user queries output to my simple user. So here you can see I'm returning that. Similarly for mutation as well, I'm doing the same thing. Again, this would be like you should get proper auto completion if you have done all the steps. Okay, you can't write it whatever you feel like. So if you see, it was add user mutation, and inside that I have add user because the file name was add user. So add user mutation, and this name is add user, so add user. So add user mutation dot add user. Okay, and this name can be anything. Again, I'm mapping it to a simple user. Alright, that's done. Next I have created an interface called user client. So it has two methods, one for getting users and one for adding users. And for getting users, this is the output. For adding users, I'm again using this add user input from GraphQL itself. So if you see, this type is imported from GraphQL because we added this add user input inside our mutation. So that Apollo Kotlin library is smart enough to generate all kind of the code completion for us. And again, this also results a simple user, but I'm not really using this output. If you want, you can use it. I'm just using the queries output. Next, I have created a file called Apollo user client. So it takes the Apollo client, so that is from Apollo Kotlin itself. It also implements the user client interface, and it overrides those two methods. And once we have the Apollo client, we can just call the query method inside it, and this again should be whatever you have defined it inside your GraphQL file. So it is get user, so I can write like get users query dot execute. Okay, so this is kind of like coroutine stuff which it does behind the background, and we can get data from it, and the data contains users, right? So if you see over here, it contains users. So data dot users, then I'm just mapping, and here I am calling our two simple user query which we have defined it inside user mapper, so that we can get it as a form of simple user. and if there is no output, then I'm just returning empty list. Similarly for add user as well, it takes an add user input, returns list of simple user, and here you will have to call apollo client dot mutation because you are performing mutation. And again here this is add user mutation. Again I have imported it from the Apollo Kotlin thing itself because of the code generation part, and here we just have to call execute dot data dot add user because the output is like that. So if you go over here, you can see data add user, the output is like that only, and here it calls the map method to map to our simple user list, and if nothing is present, I'm just returning empty list. Okay, that's done. Next we have to create this file called Godot Android plugin. Okay, the next thing is Godot Android plugin. So here I have created this Godot Android plugin, and I am extending from Godot plugin as well as lifecycle owner. So this lifecycle owner is mostly required for coroutine stuff, and I have if you see, I have created this Godot Android plugin, and this is boilerplate code for lifecycle owner because we need to make use of coroutines. Then we are created an OK HTTP client. If your API takes an authorization header, you can pass it something like this as well from the Godot side to the Android side as well if you want to, but I don't have any authorization header, so I'm ignoring it. Next here I have created our Apollo client, and I have passed my server URL as well as OK HTTP client as well. Make sure you replace localhost by your IP address if your Node.js backend is hosted locally and you are trying to run on a real Android device. If you are trying to run on it on a simulator, then I think also localhost won't work. So I think you will have to write 10.2.2 something like that. You can just Google it, or just deploy it to your Node.js or whatever backend you have on cloud, and just write your own domain. Then I have created our Apollo user client, and here this is my plugin name. You can give it any name, but do remember this name because we will be making use of this name. Here I have registered our signal, which will help us to send data back to the Godot side, and I am sending it in a form of string. Even though I am getting list of users, I am sending it in form of string just to keep it simple, but you can use list as well, but you will have to check the documentation for that. Next here I am created a get users method, which I will call it from Godot side, and here you can see I am just calling Apollo user client dot get users and sending it back to the Godot side. And for add user, same thing, I am just calling Apollo user client dot add user input. This name I am getting it from the Godot side, but once I get this name, all other stuff I have kept is hard coded, but given that name is only the mandatory field, for all other stuff you will have to write optional dot present. Okay, you can't write optional dot present for name because this is a mandatory field for GraphQL. If you see over here, you can see these are all optional fields, so that's why I'm writing something like this, but name is mandatory whenever you are trying to do a mutation. That's why I can't write optional dot present bracket name. Okay, all right, that's done. Next you will have to go to android manifest.xml, and here firstly you will have to write internet permission. Then you will have to copy this bit of code. I am using uses clear text traffic because my Node.js backend is hosted locally, that's why. Next, this thing I have copied it from Godot documentation. The only thing which you will have to change, this should be your plugin name and this should be your own package name. Okay, so this is your package name in case you forgot, and this is your plugin name. All right, that's done. Next you will again have to go to project drop down and go to your library folder, and here you will have to create a folder called export scripts template. Inside that, first create a file called plugin.cfg. Again I have copy pasted it from the docs. Only this name will be changed depending on your plugin name. You can change description and author, whatever you feel like. Next, create a file called export_plugin.gd. Again I have copied everything from the docs. The only thing which you will have to change is this should be your plugin name, and you will also have to override one more extra method called get android dependencies, and here I have to add this coroutines android as well because the android build template of Godot does not include coroutines. That's why I have to add it. Also the lifecycle runtime I have to add it because of coroutines, and we also need to add this Apollo runtime because of Apollo Kotlin. We are using that inside our build.gradle, so make sure you add this as well. Okay, so this is the file for it. Next, what you will have to do is you will have to open your open your terminal, cd to your Android project. So this is my Android project. Okay, and then you will have to run this command inside your terminal. So I'll show you what that command is. So this is the command. Once you run this command, you can go to your Android project, go to library, build, outputs, AR, and here you should see 2 AR files being generated. I have already copied those files to my Godot project, that's why you are not seeing it over here. Once that is done, create a Godot project. Inside that, create a folder called add-ons. Inside that, create a folder with your plugin name. So be careful. Again, inside that, create a folder called bin, and inside bin you have 2 folders, debug and release. Now you will have to copy the debug AR files to the debug folder of Godot and release to release, but you will also have to change the name slightly. So I'll show you that as well. Add-ons, my plugins, bin, debug, and here you can see I have copied the debug to the debug folder, but the file name is your plugin name dash debug.ar. Similarly for release, your plugin name dash release.ar. Once that is done, if you remember, we had created this export plugin and plugin.cfg. So you also have to copy paste these 2 files inside the my plugin folder or whatever your folder name is. So I have copied these 2 files. Next, go to project, install Android build template. I have already done that. Then click export, click add Android. At the bottom you might be seeing a fix import button, click on it. Then here I have checked use Gradle build, and my architecture of Android device is this, but if you don't know, you can select all 4 of this. Then go to project settings, go to plugins, make sure you check this checkbox. Once that is done, here you can see inside my UI I have just taken a VBox container, 2 buttons and 1 label, and here this should be your so I have attached one script to Node 2D. This should be your plugin name, this should be your label name, so whatever label is. So I have just dragged and dropped it, and inside on ready we are initializing our plugin as well as connecting our signals. Once the first button is pressed, this is for add user mutation. So I'm just passing this username, but you feel free to pass whatever username you feel like. And on the second button, I'm just getting the users through GraphQL. And once the signal is emitted, I'm just updating our label. So yeah, that's it. Thank you for watching. Bye.